everybody, to Higher Perspective. My name is Lee Purcell, and this is an exciting episode here. I got Carlos Tanner. And if you know anything about ayahuasca, he's kind of one of the OGs in the ayahuasca world. He's been around for many years. He's the founder of the Ayahuasca Foundation, and they're doing great work. They've helped thousands of people from all over the world. And it's just an honor to have you on here. Thanks for being on here, Carlos.
Thanks so much, Lee. It's great to reconnect with you. It's been a little while.
You too. And, a couple weeks ago, I was in a brief conversation with you. And I don't know if you realize it, but I picked up on something specifically you said. And it was about how ayahuasca has really taught you and reminded you about how you meet the moment matters more than the moment that's happening itself. Now,
yeah, without a doubt.
Such a basic philosophy, yet the practice itself is profound.
I mean, it might be the most important lesson I've ever learned. I've got a daughter. I know you've got a son, and it's definitely like the most important lesson I want my daughter to learn. And I refer to it as a superpower. Yeah. So, to try to like instill in her the desire to hone and perfect and master the skill of controlling how we react. And because ultimately that is everything. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
My first ayahuasca ceremony, I was back in 2003. Ayahuasca tourism wasn't a term yet. Retreats weren't like a thing that people did. And so nobody coached me, no one gave me any like preparation or anything. I found myself in the Amazon rainforest in a curandero's house, not like a maloca. It was like a dirt floor, family room, I guess. But, and, there were all these locals there, and I had no idea what I was really getting myself into. And I very quickly reacted to the ayahuasca experience with fear. And it was so foreign to me. And because I had no real preparation for it, I started to wonder if I was okay, and that can really spiral. Maybe now more than ever do people recognize that, when you wake up and you cough once, and then, the spiral of fear. And so that was like a brutal night for me, just fetal position, crying, wondering why I ever wanted to do this. And, wondering, whether I was going to survive. And only to then amazingly share my very first ayahuasca ceremony with the chief of the Achuari tribe, which is just kind of mind-boggling. But at the time, my first ceremony, I didn't know, indigenous chiefs must go to ceremonies all the time. That just he happened to be in my ceremony, and because the curandero was at one point staying with the Achuaris for several years, even though he himself was not. And he was such a stoic example of badassness. Yeah. He just a quick glance, you'd be like, well, that's an impressive human being.
Yeah.
And he came out. I was outside, curled up in the grass, and he came outside, threw up like a champ, and saw me whimpering like a puppy, and just we didn't speak the same language at all, but he just motioned me in, and his presence was so powerful that I was like, oh yeah, I got it. I got myself up, real dust myself off. I got to do this,
Yeah.
And that was such an important, I feel so blessed that my first ceremony was with him. And of course I never saw him again. We never even met. It was never whatever. It was what it was. And it was incredibly powerful for me, because at that point I clued in, I was I'm getting my ass kicked, and that guy is not.
Yeah.
and so it's like, this isn't the ayahuasca. Maybe I shouldn't be like projecting that everything bad happening to me is because of that stuff out there, and start looking at what stuff in here is making all of this seem so bad for me. And that was a revelation. And I'm so blessed that it was like the first ceremony where I was able to like see, holy shit, this is my reaction turning this into it. But it's something that every one of us knows. We've all been in the dark alone and heard a sound, and 10 seconds later, our heart is beating, we're sweating, we're having a panic attack, someone is about to murder us or something, and then you like finally get the balls to like go check it out, and it's a frog, like jumping against the screen window.
Yeah.
But the fear is real, and our reaction is reality. And the reaction is actually more real than what is happening. And that is such an important lesson now more than ever, probably, but forever it is such an important lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like we get caught up thinking that we need the world to be the right way for us to achieve satisfaction and happiness in life, and that is impossible.
No doubt,
But what's totally possible, and what's totally within every single person's reach, and not even that challenging once you put the time and practice into it, is changing how you react to your experiences.
Yeah.
And then satisfaction and happiness are basically guaranteed. Unless you slip up, and then that you slipped up, and you work on it, and you keep developing it, and that becomes the game of life. And that is such a more rewarding game of life.
Yeah. Sounds like you see like perceived failures as now feedback, and it's enabling you to grow along the way now.
Well, without a doubt.
That's
I mean,
cool.
I guess that you called it a perception, and when you called it a perception, I was like in denial, because it is true, and that is how deep my perception has become.
Yeah.
And I guess that's like a more recent lesson, or a more recent way of describing the same lesson, is that you can take ideas, and you can solidify them into truths. And if you are the master of that process, then you can create truths that you live in that are beneficial and positive and helpful.
Yeah.
And if you're not in control of that process, though, then you can find yourself living in truths that you didn't want to create, but ended up creating. And that essentially is a way of considering trauma. It's how I consider it.
I think that's the hardest part I've noticed for people to bridge for themselves, is because like it took me a while to realize that when I create these perceived bad moments for myself, there was this level of self-judgment because I know better, especially once I started learning stuff. Like I know I'm not supposed to do, or I know that there's a more empowering way to be. And once I started to see that, no, the fact that I'm creating this negative experience proves that I have the ability to actually create my reality. And if I choose to meet that with excitement, I'll be able to see that I'm actually in control. But it's about looking at that dark moment. And that. How would you bridge that for people that necessarily are never going to drink ayahuasca? Because like I know what it's like to sit with, and it's downright traumatizing at the time. Yet when you have that moment with this guy walking out, puking on the ground, and it gives you this revelation of like, okay, like he didn't go through that, I did. Okay, this is an individual journey. That's awesome. He's inspiring me. Now I can get up and go in. How do you bridge that for people that aren't drinking ayahuasca now?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, the key and how I choose to describe the effects of ayahuasca is that it expands our awareness, and I decided to explain that in the most like literal way, like scientific way, I guess you could say, through the expansion of our perceptive abilities. So our visible spectrum increases, our audible spectrum increases, all of our sense organs become more sensitive under the influence of ayahuasca. And so we are able to perceive more of what's happening. Our awareness is increased. And so it's through that awareness, or through the kind of liberation of our limitations of awareness, that kind of break down what we thought was true. Because, imagine if you can only see two colors, and then all of a sudden you can see six. Well, whatever you thought, all of your ideas and of what was true based on the two, now like instantly become meaningless. Like, oh, well, fuck, there's so many more colors. There's six colors instead of two. There's three times as many colors. Whatever I thought before was based on this little two color spectrum. Now I realize I got to rethink everything, and so the importance of what that does is it helps us to just shatter what we thought were truths and see them again as the ideas that they are. And then we have the opportunity to choose if we want to keep them as our truths, or let them go and replace them with more improved or more accurate or self-serving truths, which I highly recommend. Now, how do you achieve expanded awareness without ayahuasca? Well, there are definitely ways. The way that I know that works best is nature. Nature is the awareness that we hope to expand into. And so the more time that we spend in nature, the more we increase our sensitivity to the sensory perceptive abilities that we have. Now, of course, there are practices, and this has become an art. Like, to me, the goal of humankind has always been interconnected with the desire to increase our awareness. It's born into us. It's like, if you're not curious about who you are and what world you're living in, I am baffled, because it's, here we are, and so I would go so far to say that it's like an innate instinctual desire for us to increase our ability to understand the world that we live in, especially our own selves and our roles in it. And to do that, increased awareness is the greatest thing you could achieve. And so meditation, definitely, and there are a number of what you could call meditations, and yoga, a number of like yogic practices. So it doesn't have to be yoga or the different kinds of yoga, but a physical an awareness increaser on a physical level, and an awareness increaser on a mental level, and then music, which I would call an awareness increaser on an emotional level. And nature, to me, is the awareness increaser on a spiritual level.
That's cool.
And so, anybody could do it. Like, it's not, you don't have to have ayahuasca, but ayahuasca is definitely like the red eye, like it gets you there fast.
Yes.
But it doesn't last. Ayahuasca doesn't last forever. The lessons, though, can.
Yeah.
I
And
think that in terms of building a long-term practice, though, nature to me is the number one.
I think that's why these conversations are really important, because I know most people haven't and aren't going to be on the journeys that you and I have been on and are on, especially in these practices. Like you've lived in the jungle a long time, and I spent a number of years in the jungle too. And man, like bridging this is so important to me. Especially to people that haven't gone on that experience. Bridging the depth of the hell that I've put myself through to learn similar lessons, such as responding to a scenario rather than reacting, is more of an empowering approach to the scenario. And I've actually learned that through ayahuasca, through like, it can get absolutely terrifying. Like phenomenally terrifying, damn near traumatizing. But in that exact same moment that I have freaked out, I've had similar ceremonies where I've decided in the moment to sit up with it, to breathe gently, to calm myself, and then the whole experience shifts. And then upon application of that outside of an ayahuasca space, it's a similar response, it's a similar result. And it's just so profound to me. And I love what you said about nature. Have you ever heard about the Schumann frequency?
I have, yeah.
Where there's did you know, like I was reading once that there's over 200 lightning strikes every second on Earth to keep the Earth charged at 7.83 hertz, which is resonant with the human body. So
Yeah, man. I mean, that's I guess, what is it, like Gaian theory? I'm not even sure what it's called, and it's not important what it's called, but to me, like, why nature increases awareness, and why nature heals, and why nature knows, and why we even have the word nature, is because we are a part of a living being.
yeah.
And so the more connected we are to that living being, the less decisions we have to make ourselves, if any. And so we thankfully took biology in school, you know, and we learned about cells, and my body's got something like 5 trillion, I think. So does yours. Like every human body, all these cells, they're all individuals. You could take one out and it still lives on its own. You know, it's literally like an individual. It's got a respiratory, excretory, circulatory, digestive, all these systems. It's like a tiny little creature. And I think it has consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly has the ability to react to its environment. And yet the collection of all of them is me. And they're always dying, always being reborn. And, you know, how healthy they are individually cumulatively adds up to how healthy I am.
Yeah.
And each one of those cells, I mean, if it was like, oh God, I'm all by myself out here, you know, I'm on my own, chances are, yeah, that cell isn't going to be healthy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's probably going to do the wrong thing. But luckily, all the cells just collectively work together in this collective consciousness that is my consciousness. And we're the same. You know, me as my collection, I'm just a cell in a giant body also. And there's trillions of us as well. And we all like have our individual responsibility to be healthy, to contribute to the health of the larger being.
Yeah.
But yet, that, to me, the most beneficial part of that is that we're taken care of. You know, we're not on our own. We're not on our own in the slightest. And nature is what we are a part of. Nature is the being.
Did you have such an understanding prior to your first ayahuasca journey?
No way.
Me neither. like I'm talking, like I would throw full bags of chips out the car window on the highway in the mountains and not even think about it. Like it just wouldn't even, it just didn't compute. And to actually have a connection with nature as a spirit, as an organism, and to literally recognize the oneness with this is so profound to me. And you're right. The way you just put it really connected a lot of dots for me too, because like we actually aren't alone. Nature's saying, hey, I got the bottom line covered. Like nature provides us with food, with shelter, with like basically whatever we need to be creative on this earth. And you know, I asked somebody once, I said, why do we destroy things so much? And he said, because we're fascinated with nature and we're trying to replicate nature. And that was such a profound answer, because you know, even in like things like candy, you see grape flavored candy, orange flavored candy, like everything is flavored like nature. It's giving this perception of nature, but it isn't really nature. Like even Marlboro cigarettes, like you got Mapacho and then you got mainstream cigarettes, which are just this emulation of the spirit of tobacco. And everything is just trying to kind of emulate nature. which seems to be way more like of a process than just connecting with nature itself. And connecting with nature seems to provide like way more profound results, realizations, peace within. How do you bridge that message?
You know, there's a great book. I believe the author is Daniel Quinn. The book's called Ishmael. I read it back in college, and it's a really interesting book. I would recommend it still, even though I admit I haven't read it since college. But it talks about it's like a gorilla explaining the Bible to a human, which
Yes.
is kind of mind-boggling in its own right. But there was an interesting part of that I started to elaborate on, and I don't remember if I'm about to quote the book or not. Forgive me if I am. And this Daniel Quinn, I shout out to Daniel Quinn, or if it was my own kind of spin-off. But you know, we have a creation story at the center of Christian culture, which I could maybe call like the general culture of the United States. And that is that God created humans, and then humans kind of messed up, and then they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And I don't recall there ever being a part where God was like, you can come back now.
Time up didn't end.
You know, and so our like creation story, at least as so many people are taught in the United States, is that you got kicked out of the paradise.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us to want to strive to create our own natural paradise, it almost makes sense.
That does make sense.
It's almost just like, hey, well, God kicked us out of his paradise. Well, we're gonna show him, like, I'll make a even better paradise. It'll have even cooler stuff.
That's so true. That's so true. That's absolutely the human mind and how it works.
I can see why a lot of people are atheist. You know, like I know a lot of people and they're atheist. And if that was what God, if I thought that God was like a guy kicking us out of the house for misbehaving, yeah, man, I'd be atheist too.
That's really cool what you just brought up. Like, you brought up another perspective, and the first thing you did was you related to it. And I think that's a valuable lesson for many of us is if there's a difference of opinion, difference of understanding, if there's a different belief, just making that effort to understand where somebody would be coming from is so important.
Yeah, for sure. Especially just like, you know, sometimes it's where you're coming from in terms of a collection of experiences that shaped your literal perspective. But sometimes it's just a word. You know, for me, like with God, it's partly a collective of experiences, but mostly it's just like how we chose to define a word.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I feel like when we disagree with someone, we're just disagreeing about the meaning of a word.
Of a word, but we all have the same fundamental.
But we're like arguing
Yeah,
about it without ever discussing what we think the meaning is, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so we're, you know, or like the classic one where we're just saying better, you know, like which one's better? And what does better mean? You know, it's always like this idea, well, I know what better means, and you know what better means. So how can we not be agreeing on what's better? You're like, no, I don't think we both are defining it the same way, obviously.
That. It's really cool that you point that out because another lesson I learned through ayahuasca was sensation is like the initial language. And these words like that we're speaking right now, they're man-made, but they say 90% or whatever it is of communication is nonverbal. Where like I already know what you're saying to me before you say it because I can actually feel that. But we've gotten so identified right here and we get caught up in these schematics. And then it's almost like this division is created when most of the time, like you said, we're all in agreement.
I agree. But I do. I think that our greatest fault with communication is that we imply objectivity when we mean subjectivity.
Mhm.
And so the person that we're speaking to hears our words and interprets them as if we are speaking some sort of objective truth instead of subjective opinion. And therefore, they have no choice but to disagree if it doesn't resonate with their own subjective opinion. And then they get caught thinking of their own subjective opinion as objective truth. And there you have it. Now you've got two people arguing when you could just be like, oh, that's what you think. That's interesting. Like that would be the end of it. But because of our lack of awareness, maybe, or our just poor conditioning of language, like the language itself could be to blame. The word better to me is a terrible word. It's such a useless word because it implies objectivity when it means subjectivity. And so unless you say, I think it's better, if you just say it's better, then now you're like throwing the gauntlet down. You're like, it's better, like that's the truth. And it could be as simple as what flavor ice cream you prefer, but you're like, chocolate is better, and now someone has to come back and like, no way, strawberry, you're like, dude, what do you seriously? Like, I like chocolate. And you say, oh, I like strawberry. Oh, great. All right. So let's go get some.
Yeah. And, it breaks down to like this need for validation. If you don't believe that chocolate ice cream is the best ice cream, if you actually believe strawberry and I believe chocolate, like in essence, I'm going to die if you're not validating my identity. I've identified with the fact that chocolate is the best, but it can be the best for me and strawberry can be the best for you.
Right. And that's just words.
Yeah.
No, we've got enough problems, but I think the least we could do is to like make sure that we're stepping back and taking a good look at the words that we use, because best should be always replaced with favorite, in my opinion.
Ooh,
Like
ooh.
don't say best anymore. Just throw the word out because it's useless and it's only going to cause problems. But if you say favorite, whatever,
Yeah.
nobody can come back at you and say, what? Your favorite is that? The best they can do is say, well, my favorite's this. And great. Now you're still, talking.
That's
But,
cool. Because
but,
you,
oh, go
okay,
ahead.
yeah, tell me what
I was going to say, but the perspective issue is a whole nother can of worms, because perspective is not just words. Of course, words are going to complicate it further if you're not like doing your best to choose how to speak in the way that will be understood the most. But your perspective is like a collection of everything that's happened to you up until that point, and that to me is probably where disagreements get real heated.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing though. You were saying like you want to like defend it because you've convinced yourself that something's better. Well, when you're talking about perspective, you've got the proof. You've got the memories. You can like rattle off all the memories that prove that your perspective is accurate. And you know what? It is. Your perspective is 100% accurate and valid and can never be invalidated. The way that you see the world from exactly where you're standing in life is always 100% accurate. And because you know that, if it's challenged, you're going to fight to the death, because you know in your heart it can't be different, because you're right. And so is the other person. Their perspective is also 100%. And so what's the point of arguing about it? That it makes no sense. And that to me is where the language messes it up. Because if we can get to a point where we're saying, I see the world like this. If you start your whatever it is that you're about to say with that phrase, you kind of set the tone. You know, even if you like describe it with better and best and objectivity and stuff all wrapped up in it, but as long as you start it with like, this is how I see the world, the other person automatically has a framework where they're going to come back and say, okay, this is how I see the world. And at best, hopefully, you guys can both see, oh, there's a different way of seeing the world. And, you know, and start to maybe expand on the perspective that you have to recognize the other perspectives. I wrote a paper. I'm a philosophy major, and I have a degree in philosophy. And my senior thesis was optimistic multi-perspectivism. And the Om theory, optimistic multi-perspectivism.
Yeah.
And it was designed specifically to prevent arguments. So when you felt that an argument was coming on, then hopefully you would stop and go Om, and you would remember the Om theory by saying Om, and then you'd pivot the dynamic of the relationship of the argument to say, why do you think that? You know, did something happen to you? What are the experiences that led you to believe that? And here are the experiences that led me to see the things that I see this way. And the idea was that you'd expand your awareness, your perspective, so that you could know more, you know. And a perfect example of that I used in the theory was like someone at the top of a mountain talking to someone at the bottom of the mountain. And, you know, one's in snow, no trees, no animals, super cold, rocks.
Yeah.
And the other person is like lush forest, trees everywhere, animals everywhere. It's super hot. And they're like they can't come close to agreeing with each other, but they're on the same mountain. And they just don't know that there's that part of it. And the other one doesn't know the other part of it. And if they listen to each other, they can learn more about the mountain. Obviously, the mountain is a metaphor for the truth of reality that we live in. And so that to me is like another example kind of expanding our awareness, you know?
I love that. And you're talking physically going in and going Om in that moment where you feel an altercation coming up. And that makes a lot of sense because especially like I deeply reflect on communication. It's such a passion for me to make sure I'm effectively communicating. And one reason being just simply when I'm speaking to somebody, I'm investing a specific amount of energy. And if I'm investing that energy and there's no returns on that energy, if it's not actually landing, then I've wasted my time and energy. And there's many other reasons for it, but that being one reason why it's just powerful to practice effective communication. And I noticed that when caught off guard, I'll feel it in my chest. If I'm caught off guard with, boom, no, I don't agree with that, or, oh. And I feel like many of us are responding to our physical sensations rather than the words being spoken. And by going inward and actually oming to that vibration, you're meeting that sensation neutrally. You're responding to the sensation itself, and it's enabling you to create the necessary neutrality to actually move forward and find common ground with the human being in front of you, which is that's phenomenal.
Well, it's a theory. I mean, I wish I could say that I mastered it, but it is something that I believe in.
How do you manage now? It sounds like you really consciously practice a similar thing when it comes to effective communication. And like when you travel into New York and stuff like that, and you're in the world around you, how does that benefit you? How does that affect you?
Oh, you know, I feel like I get along with everybody. And you know, being in the position that I am, and it was a similar position with you, you know, where your job is to be an assistant in people's personal healing journeys. You know, the last thing you want is for them to think you're an asshole. You're not going to do your job very well.
No.
And so, you know, that was like this awesome practice for me to meet people from all over the world and having all different perspectives, and to try to meet them in a way where I always wanted them to respect me enough to listen to me, because I felt that I had insights that could help them improve their outcome of the healing journey during the time they spent with me.
Yeah.
And, and a big part of that was uh, respecting them and their ability to help me.
Yeah.
And, I think that was a big lesson as a facilitator. I think in the beginning, I'd been studying with my teacher for 3 years before we started like doing a retreat. And I definitely feel like I thought like I knew, I thought, I guess I considered myself in what I would call like a Western traditional educational model, where the person with the knowledge gives some of it to the person without the knowledge, which I totally disagree with now. But that was what we kind of grew up in.
Yeah.
And then at one point I like needed help. I something was happening in my personal life during a retreat, and I like broke my own rules and like kind of revealed that I was struggling, and the response of people like to be able to help me was so great that I was like, why am I keeping this pattern? Like, why am I looking at this as if there needs to be a teacher and a student, and not just recognize the fact that learning is happening both ways all the time, as is teaching. And and that's what healing is a part of that as well.
It's like the ultimate practice of vulnerability. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's very easy to stay on such a pedestal. The challenge is stepping off that pedestal that people are giving you and showing them who they are. But in order to show somebody who they are, you got to normalize their experience by showing them who you are. And it's like, for me, it's like facing the perception that I'm going to be highly disappointing this human being in front of me if I show them who I am. But
Right.
every single time I step into that, they're so happy because they're not alone. And I've personally put people on the pedestal, and that's only my perception. And I'll never get to that pedestal as long as they remain on that pedestal.
My personal path with ayahuasca, looking back now, like it's so crazy what I got to do, and and how my path was formed. I feel like it's pretty unique. I was invited by a curandero to become his student, and I moved into his house, and I lived with him and his family for 4 years. And not many people have that story, but it was such a blessing. And the biggest reason why it was such a blessing was because it was like behind the curtain kind of, and I got to see that my teacher, who in ceremony was like a demigod, like he was such an impressive human being, but yet the next day at breakfast, or like all the rest of life, he was a person, like just a regular person who worried about his kids, who had fights with his wife, who had to pay the bills, who had stress at times, and all the things. Like he wasn't a guru, and he never pretended to be a guru. And in fact, that's why I loved him so much, and I still love him to this day so much. Don Juan Tangoa Paima is his name. And this was his ceremony getup, what I'm wearing right now.
So
like
awesome.
he'd wear a t-shirt, baseball cap turned backwards, just like whatever. I'm not trying to impress anybody with how I look. Like
that's important too. That's
let's
valuable.
let's do this, and it meant a lot to me that he had that attitude, and it's obviously something that rubbed off on me in how I feel like I'm not the kind of person that wears a Shipibo shirt. That's, I guess, where I'm at,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But more importantly, like, he was and is just a real person. And for me as his student, I think that it's kind of common if you were to just know a curandero or a shaman, if you're not familiar with that term, if you only see them in the ceremony, then I think it would almost be logical that you'd think, well, I will never do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you could see him like afterward, or like meet him walking back, and he just took a shit and is walking back from the outhouse, and you're going to take a shit, you realize, like, dude, maybe I can do this, like. And that was like super important, obviously, for me to kind of stick with it and keep at it.
That's really cool. Do you ever think, like, from your specific individual journey, like, wow, thank God it was me in that scenario, because like that was a testing scenario, and I'm grateful that I had the strength to be able to see through it and gain what I gained through such an experience. 'Cause you put yourself in a very vulnerable position, especially before ayahuasca tourism was even a word. Like, you know, like I had my first experience in 2013, and it hadn't exploded in the way that it had even then. Like, but it had, it was definitely growing, but that was before, like, a lot in the last 7 years has shifted. And then you go back another 10 years, and that's you. Like, that's a very vulnerable, testy position to not have any analytical anchors to show you, hey, this is all good.
Yeah, I mean, it's perspective's always evolving. So when I look back, I'm 46 years old now. I started when I was 28.
Wow.
And when I look back, I was like, I was crazy. Like, that's the craziest thing you could possibly do. But at the time, it would have been crazy not to do it.
Yeah.
Like my experiences were so confirming that I would have regretted it for the rest of my life if I didn't move down and live in the Amazon rainforest with that guy.
Wow.
It was that, like, blatant, that I just had, if I turned my back on this, then I would just flush my life down the toilet. That was literally what it felt like at the time.
Yeah.
Where this was such, like, the most obvious. It was as if you were lost. I was lost and wandering around aimlessly, hoping that somehow I would pick up the scent of some trail that could get me out of feeling lost. And then literally, like, a golden brick road showed itself in front of me. And I was like, well, I could wander over there still, like, no, dude, you're going to walk down the yellow brick road,
That's so incredible. That's so incredible. And then, in turn, in following your heart, you found your family. Things started opening up. You started getting on board with all these projects. You're one of the pioneers of the whole ayahuasca movement on Earth. Like, you're one of them.
I appreciate that. For me, I guess the word, yeah, sure. I'm honored to be in that category. I mean, I
Absolutely.
look at Richard Evans Schultes, Richard Spruce, like,
And you're looking at your OGs.
yeah, right. Those are my OGs for sure.
Yes.
But yeah, my life, I mean, I look back at it as, how can I, like, help people? Because, I feel so blessed that I found my path, and my path was like a yellow brick road, or this golden road. It was like, I wasn't struggling to figure out where it went.
Yeah.
It was just laid out in front of me. All I had to do was walk down it. Sometimes I skipped down it. Sometimes I ran down it. Sometimes I, whatever, danced along. But it was never in question of where it was. But now, looking back at it, there was no path. I called it my path, but what I think I was really talking about was my faith. And I think that's actually, like, a better word. Of course, I will still always call it my path, because I traveled, because it was like a journey, because, the word fits so much.
Yeah.
But the word faith, it's something that you have in your heart, in your mind. And that's where the path existed. The path existed in my heart and my mind. The golden brick road, there was no actual golden brick road. I'm just saying that because it was so clear to me that I needed to do this, that I felt it in my heart. And I think that's what faith feels like.
Really cool.
Faith is when you don't question it. Faith looks like a golden brick road. And I think the reason I say that is because who isn't like looking for their path? Well, maybe some of us aren't, but there's a lot of people who are. But I think that maybe they're kind of caught up in the idea that it's out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even the way I describe like my path, I talk about it in the out there part.
Mm-hmm.
I moved down to Peru. I moved in with my teacher who became who was a curandero who became my teacher. And I ended up like starting this organization and blah, blah, blah. Like all of it is like out there stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like outside of me.
Yeah.
But the actual path I was following was always inside of me. And maybe like if people knew that, they'd be able to kind of look in a different place for how to get themselves out of feeling lost.
One of the biggest lessons I learned through ayahuasca was a very direct message. Was that the outside world is real, but I'm never experiencing it. I'm only ever observing the outside world. I can only ever experience my sensations, my feelings, myself, my emotions, my thoughts. I'm only ever experiencing this vessel in this incarnation. Everything else I get to observe, even when I'm freaking out. Even if I'm freaking out about what's going on out here, I'm actually only ever observing it. I'm always experiencing in here. And you're right, there is a misconception about that, because once that realization happened for me, it was profound. And that means I hadn't had that understanding that it's always been me experiencing my feelings, my emotions, everything. And that there's a sense of powerlessness when it's outside of you, when the outside world is controlling you. There's a sense of powerlessness within that space. And it's that's where we get kind of locked in and confined.
Here's a great example. I built a research center, and the Riospo Research and Retreat Center, we opened in 2017, and last year we hosted the first ever government-funded ayahuasca research. While I was building a research center, people, believe it or not, asked me what kind of research I'd be doing, what were my plans. And I did not have any, because I didn't know what was around that bend. That's like a way I could say it, that was like too far down the path. Right now I'm building the research center. But my response was, well, I'm not a researcher. I have no scientific background at all. I'm not medically trained. I'm like not cut out to do research in any way. No one would publish anything that I was to research. But I feel like if I build this place and I keep calling it a research center, then people are going to show up that want to do research in that center. And that's what happened. Simon Ruffle came and did a retreat. He's a doctor from the NHS, the National Health Services in the UK. And his mind was blown by the retreat. And as a psychologist, he like saw the value of ayahuasca as a treatment method, and the results were staggering from his perspective. And so he encouraged his friend, Nigel Netspan, to come, who was also, Simon's a psychiatrist. Nigel's a psychologist. His mind was blown. The two of them decided, let's study this. Let's do a pilot study. They put it on their own credit cards. They set up a research project just funded by themselves. The
Wow.
results were so good that they pitched it and got a grant from the British Medical Research Council to do a full-fledged research project last year. And that funding will continue, and we're starting up in October to do phase 2 of that study. But I didn't like that. All of that's amazing. I didn't do any of that except that I just knew it was going to happen. And
Wow.
that's like, I just knew that this path, I had so much faith that I'm just going to keep walking the path, like all of it. And I mean, it's so cool to be able to trace my steps back and
Yes.
see there were so many things along the way. And I was just talking to Luke Hancock, who is Graham Hancock's son. And Luke Hancock just happened to like kind of stumble across me and Don Juan back in 2005, maybe. I don't remember exactly. And Luke and I hit it off. I'm a huge fan of Graham Hancock's. I had like 4 books in my room at Don Juan's house, and we drank ayahuasca together, and we became friends. And he was so cool. He was managing Graham Hancock's website, so he put a link to my website on Graham Hancock's webpage. And Graham Hancock at that time was doing tours, leading like retreats to the pyramids of Giza. He hadn't written about ayahuasca yet.
Yeah.
He hadn't written Supernatural yet, and maybe he had written. I know he had written Fingerprints of the Gods and Sign of the Seal, which took place in Egypt. So he was doing these tours to Egypt, and a guy named Christian Moran went and did that tour with Graham, and it like kind of blew his mind. And during that retreat, Graham talked about ayahuasca, and Christian decided that he wanted to do ayahuasca, and then he chose our center because the link was on Graham's website.
Yeah.
And then he came and did a retreat, and then he ended up making the film Ayahuasca Diary. And Ayahuasca Diary was this incredible film where he documented us heal someone of cancer in 18 days using ayahuasca and other plant medicines. So it was like incredible, the outcome that it had. He then went on to become the president of a charity organization called Grant Town Foundation. And when they decided what to do for their first project of funding an idea or concept that they wanted to support to make the world a better place, he thought of me. And so he pitched me the idea to build the research center, providing the funding. And so, all these tiny little things, like just put themselves all together.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately like just how life is.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that faith, then you run the risk of questioning whether it will work.
So funny.
And if you question whether it will work, and you're like, if you plant a seed of doubt next to a seed of great ideas, then you're kind of like putting weeds in your garden, and so when you think that you've got your path, when you have that faith that you're headed in the right direction, then you just don't grow weeds in your garden. And then, you just have the highest, you give yourself the highest chance for success. Now, I knew I wasn't planning any of that. That's the crazy part. Like, I never thought of that. All of this is just me looking back and recognizing, how I was.
That was gonna be my next question. Were you?
Yeah. I never thought of it. I just knew, I just knew. I would secretly tell people, if I had enough like confidence in our relationship, that I was on a mission from God.
Yeah.
That was like because I knew if I said that like out loud, then people might think I was crazy. But that's what it felt like.
See, that's a great form of self-awareness. Being such an extrovert after like my first few ayahuasca journeys, like I went back home and I just spread the gospel of ayahuasca, and I had to face the projection of sounding like a nutball for a little bit. And so I went inward and learned that lesson of, okay, bridging this stuff really matters. And you got to use some type of discretion when communicating your experiences.
For sure. It's almost dangerous.
It can't be. You have to have, like, I got to a point where it felt like everybody in my close circle, it just felt like everybody was mocking me. And I got to a point where I literally had to look in the mirror, and I was staring into my own eyes by myself. I'm asking myself, like, what are you doing? Like, and I literally, I remember telling myself, like, you could stop all this. Like, stop this meditation, stop connecting with the trees, stop telling people about these experiences, stop reading into it, like, stop doing all this new stuff that you've learned, and everything would go back to normal. And being aware of that really drove me, because like it made no sense that if I just stopped, everyone would just almost like me or love me again. And it was so confusing for me. But then I got this like righteous anger in myself, and I was actually yelling at myself in the mirror. I was like, you keep being you. You keep doing what you're doing. Do these people love you for who you're being? Because you're just trying to figure out who you are. You're just trying to discover, find your own faith, however I worded it to myself. And I got so righteous within myself. But the next day I went to work and I just started meditating. Just I did my job, answered the phone, whatever happened, I would do, but I'd go right back into my meditation. I would just stick with my practice. And what was so profound about staying resilient on the path and having that faith that you described was the same people over the next few days, the same people that were mocking me and laughing at what I was doing. It was as if each one of them at separate times started taking me aside one by one. And they were sharing resonance in the way that I was thinking. And they had thought and felt that way. And they started inquiring and being inquisitive about what I was doing. And it was happening so often. Before you know it, people are coming to my house and they're laying on the couch, and we're basically having full out counseling sessions now. And like, it's over and over and over. And I realized that a lot of these concepts, a lot of the stuff most of us think about, but it hasn't been okay to talk about in our culture. And that can be scary. So what we're afraid to speak of will shun. And it takes a level of resilience and confidence in oneself to keep doing it. But what I was able to do was create this space for others. They seen that it was safe. And then through me, they were able to open up and explore these realms themselves. But yeah, you're right. It can be dangerous, because and I think that's why I think back, I'm like, oh my God, thank God that was me. Because I ran into a lot of people who go home and they get a hold of me because they're having trouble communicating with people about these experiences. And I'm able to bridge stories like that for them that is enabled to give them some type of context and understanding of what's actually going on for them.
Well, I think that, again, like now, maybe more than ever, we're starting to realize that it is potentially dangerous to just preach your words, and that you do want to like play it kind of one step at a time in terms of resonance. But I know for me, of course, like we were both in a similar place where we just knew, and we weren't going to like, it would be impossible to just like go back.
It was such a weird fork in the road for me. Like, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I approached it like I haven't figured out how to communicate it well enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely like a motivation for me to like strive, and I still do it all the time. Like I'm always like I'm giving presentations in my head all the time.
Yeah.
Like if I'm driving my car, sometimes if I'm by myself, I'll give the presentation like out loud. I will like speak out loud and let the ideas like come out, and then I'll like stop it and be like, no, I think I can say that a different way and say it better, and like
Wow.
come back to another way of saying it, and because it's so important to me. You know, it's so important to me to reach as many people as possible. And it's just like what you're saying. We live in a bizarre culture where emotions are like some foreign entity or something, you know,
Yeah.
and spirit is like so far removed from our perception of ourselves, which is so kind of baffling. And so I don't say spirit very often. I'm actually like bringing spirit back in now.
Cool. Do you know what it means? If you look up the etymology, have you ever looked that up?
No.
Breath.
Oh yeah. um I'm bringing it back in because I started to recognize that I was kind of like almost ignoring like the people that resonate with spirit. You know, I became so focused that I wanted to like cross over and reach all these people that would be put off if I threw out like
Yeah,
plant spirits.
I know what you mean.
But now like I feel like it's important for me to find that way to integrate it back in.
Yeah.
But basically consciousness became my like go-to term, and it still is, to be honest, because consciousness is so universal. I've never had someone say like, you believe in consciousness. You know, like, it's pretty recognized and understood. But yeah, I like talked out last year. I talked out what has become like this core theory, I guess you could say I have, where it's the three elements of gas, liquid, and solid, and how they relate to our mind and our emotions and our body. And you know, like our body is like the solidified ice of consciousness, and our emotions are the liquid flowing state of our consciousness, and our thoughts, our mind is the vapor of our consciousness. And how you can condense an idea down into a belief. You know, you believe with your feelings, you think ideas, but they become beliefs when you feel them, and they become truths when they're part of your body. And the trouble that we have when we freeze beliefs into truths that don't serve us, and how we can release those personal truths that are detrimental to us back into the belief realms and back into the idea realms, so that they can just float away like ideas do and like vapor does.
Do you have a specific practice for that? For
Oh
yourself?
well, I was talking about ayahuasca.
Oh
In
yes,
the
I mean like out of the ayahuasca, like for me, I look at ayahuasca as like my dojo, and I'm training. Every time I'm sitting in the Maloka, every time I'm working with the medicine, I'm training. And then every time I'm not in the medicine, right, the next morning, I'm now in the world and I'm applying what I'm learning. And I'm curious if like you have a specific like, oh, I just caught myself falling into some belief that doesn't really serve my highest purpose or my mission or my my life, whatnot. Do you or is it just automatic at this point? Is there something where you're like, oh, that's my ego and that's really taken over? Okay, I gotta drop back in.
Well, the cool part that I discovered, because I drank ayahuasca, like I was on my way to an ayahuasca ceremony when I was talking that out. I actually got to drink with a group of five students that did my course, the initiation course. They have a community, and they ran a ceremony. It was the first time I'd ever drank ayahuasca in a ceremony that was led by the students of the course that we did, which was
Cool.
such a super cool honor. And it was on my way to that ceremony that I was talking out loud in my car, these ideas. And then when I got into the ceremony, I realized this, like, the secret gem of all of that was that I resonated emotionally with that theory. I believed it. It started as an idea, really as a way of describing something, but it really felt like I really felt that it was true. And then when I went into the ceremony, I sank that feeling into my body. And so what essentially became a core truth for me that night was that we have the ability to transform our truths into beliefs and our beliefs into ideas, as well as our ideas into beliefs and our beliefs into truths. And so that went from like the concept stage into the belief stage, into the truth stage. But as the theory became a truth, it became a power. The truth itself translates to ability. And so that was like, oh man, like I was so excited about that. And so that like became something really special to me. But again, like, what would be my technique? What to me, what the same is what happens with ayahuasca. What I feel like happens is that I expand my awareness into nature, and that's what I think ayahuasca is. Yeah. It's the tool of nature that expands awareness. So anything I can do with ayahuasca, I can do with nature. Like everything I do in the Amazon rainforest can be done in the forest behind my house. Everything that can be done with the medicinal plants that I've learned so much about from the Shipibo curanderos can be done with the plants that are growing in the fields around my neighborhood.
That's cool that you say that, because I think it's Don Enrique that talks about the condor and the eagle, the story of that.
Well, it's a very famous myth, but yes, he talks about it. The
What
prophecy,
is that?
sorry.
Yeah, like what is that prophecy fully? Like I know Lash has kind of briefly given me some ideas about it, but I haven't fully heard like the whole story of what the prophecy actually is, because it seems very relevant to today.
Yeah, it's something that in Peru people just kind of say, oh, eagle and condor, as if like everybody must know that. But yeah, the prophecy was that for 500 years the eagle would chase the condor, but then after 500 years the two birds would fly together and they would mate, and they would give birth to a new bird, a species that no one had ever seen before. And that's basically it, except that the eagle was considered to be North America and the condor was considered to be South America.
Makes
And
total sense.
the condor is a symbol of the heart, and the eagle is a symbol of the mind. And so it's like the coming together of the mind and the heart. And so the condor being like the heart, it would be like associated with the spirit. And whereas the mind would be like associated with technology and science. And so it was like, the scientific paradigm would like push away spiritual paradigm for 5 centuries, but then at a certain time, like, science and spirit would come together and give birth to a new paradigm of reality that was the most beautiful. Oh, sorry, the bird that they gave birth to is the most beautiful creature the world has ever known. That's like the end of the prophecy.
You know what's cool about that? The research center you've started is the first research center of its kind, right?
Ayahuasca Research Center, yeah.
It's a research center where you're getting people to do scientific data on this spiritual experience. You built the bridge.
Well, I had a huge advantage, man, because
Sure.
I would meet people, and I lived with a shaman. I'm American, and I live with a shaman because I'm studying to be a shaman. And I would meet people, and as soon as like that information came up, they'd be like, "Oh, you're the prophecy." Like, "Oh, you're
In the
the
early
one."
days, you were getting that?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. And
because
like,
it wasn't normal. You know, it wasn't normal
no,
for a gringo to be living with a shaman. That was like unusual.
if somebody wrote a book in 50 years, 100 years about this story, why not? If somebody looked at the whole, if you think about it, when someone looks at like, yeah, this Carlos Tanner guy actually was the first guy to merge science and spirit in a quantifiable way in that regard. Like why not actually like? That's cool. That's really cool.
I appreciate all those kind words for sure, but there's of course there were pioneers before me. Jordy
Absolutely.
Reeby, who passed away last month, unfortunately, he published like 25 studies on
Mm,
ayahuasca.
yeah.
You know, there were, of course, there were like people that made whatever I was doing possible.
Terrence
Um,
McKenna, I mean, he articulates these experiences in just such a way that anybody can really grasp. It's really cool.
Sure, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't have come down if it wasn't for Terrence McKenna.
Yeah.
But hilariously now, or not hilariously, just the reality of it, now I look at Terrence and I'm like, well, that almost nothing that he had to say is still, you know, still works, for, at least for me. You know,
Wow.
because that, well, that's what science is, though.
Yeah, it's
You know, you
evolving.
don't look back at the early scientists and are like, you know, oh yeah, all of his discoveries are still like the early scientists, none of their theories are still true.
What's cool about that is actually last year I just finished one of Graham Hancock's books, and she's been diving into it with me, and we've been talking about it and about the pyramids. How it's proven that there was it's evident that there was water there, and a lot of these guys are saying that there wasn't. And now there's this ego in the scientific community, and it's understandable where somebody makes this their life work and then it gets debunked. Yet I mean, you'd think that they would be excited to have a new scientific breakthrough, but they've created this identity of they're the ones that discovered this and they have this now. I love that ayahuasca is coming around at such a time where once you add spirit to that equation, it can really do a lot to assist the ego at that.
Well, hopefully, I don't know, maybe in 10 years I'll be like arguing for my antiquated ideas. That's a joke. I hope. But there's a great book, man. Rupert Sheldrake. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He coined the term
Okay.
morphogenetic fields or morphic resonance. But he wrote the book Science Set Free,
Yeah.
and it's basically a critique of the problems that are preventing science from making more progress than is possible. And one of the big ones is that early scientists were not making it a career. You know, like being a scientist wasn't a career. And so because there are scientists whose livelihood depends on the grant that they have, which is tied to the theory that they have, they're like have this like financial motivation to defend an idea even if it's not as accurate, because they want to make sure that they can pay their bills. And so it's become quite complicated, like the way that
Yeah.
science, we love to think the idea of science is still like this pure pursuit for truth, but unfortunately it's been corrupted in a bunch of different ways. And Rupert Sheldrake does a great job of talking about that in his book Science Set Free, which I also recommend.
And just a full circle back to what you're talking about, faith. With faith, you don't really have to skew anything like that because you have faith in the moment.
Well, yeah. You know, I'll always be checking, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, the last thing you want to do is take faith into some,
Well, then that becomes the ego pedestal. And that's why I
yeah,
think you're skewy about the word spirit, because you've probably seen that get kind of
right.
misconstrued into the weirdness that like there is a weird like ego you can adapt in spirituality about being spiritual without even realizing
Oh man, yes, there is.
it.
um, again, like I feel so blessed that my first teacher just didn't get caught up in any of that. And that kind of set the tone for me, at least to know to check in and do my best,
Yeah.
it would probably be impossible to say that I wasn't like doing that in some degree, like kind of playing myself up in some degree, but I try to like keep it real. But to
It
get
kind of,
back to get back one last, we were talking about the science that led up to what we're doing. One of the coolest things uh, for me was that I was like an early student, and so even though there were early pioneers, there were fewer early students, and so Terence McKenna, for example, he never studied the tradition, and I could see like there was a perception that happened, a paradigm shift that is still currently happening, and I'm kind of on the cusp of it maybe, and the next generation will be much further to one side than had been in the past, which is the idea of how we view indigenous people. And so you don't have to go too many generations back, one, to see that indigenous people were often viewed in an inferior way, and the term primitive was used when in our lifetime, like it wasn't so long ago. And so for that, I like take into the account that it wasn't so rare for someone like Terence McKenna to view indigenous people with an idea of primitivism, which unfortunately resulted in a lack of respect for the tradition. And so, I feel like this newer generation, which I consider myself a part of, has had more respect for indigenous culture and tradition. But I definitely see that like the next generation will take that to even further level. But how that applies, I think, is really important to the research that we're doing,
yeah,
because the research that we're doing is essentially being done. I've been offering a course for 10 years, for 12 years, I've offered an educational course to teach the tradition. And so inherent in that course is this utmost respect for the indigenous culture. And so to tie that in with the research, I kind of do feel like the research that we're doing now is going to be integrating our understanding of the indigenous tradition in a way that may never have been done before. And that to me is going to result in a better understanding of the potential of not just ayahuasca, but an indigenous traditional use of plant medicine. And that was key for me in my discussions with the research team, because before you saw research being done, it was kind of like standard scientific research. Let's take this substance, let's break it down, let's see what the active components are, let's give some people a placebo, let's give some people this. But most of it, almost all of it, was in a clinical setting.
yeah, yeah,
There wasn't an understanding of the tradition because they weren't not students of the tradition. At least that's my perception of it. And of course, I'm speaking generally, so I don't want, I'm sure some of those people, I don't know all of, I don't know everybody that came before me. I am sure that some of them did understand and had maybe a much deeper level of understanding than I do. But it was very important to me that the research that we do be done on the tradition and not to view ayahuasca separate from that tradition, because it isn't. You can't separate the ceremony from the ayahuasca, in my mind. You can't separate the ideologies and methodologies of plant medicine from the chemical constituency of the plant medicines. They're all combined. The effectiveness is the result of the entire package. And so in order to fully understand it, you have to look at and study the entire package. And to me, the potential result of that could be that we modify and improve all forms of medicine because we better understand the consciousness enhancement that is the tradition. And if we can improve the consciousness enhancement of the healing process, then no matter what medicine we choose to use, it will always be more effective. And that to me is the greatest gift that we have, to be able to study still intact ancestral traditions, because it's definitely something that our ancestors knew regardless of our cultural heritage.
My God, like I'm going to practice communicating this medicine while I'm driving in the car because of what you just said. That was so profound and so accurate. Like really, I, before I first moved to Peru, I got a hold of one of the facilitators from my personal retreat. And I asked him if he has any advice for me. And his advice was go to San Francisco and make sure you spend intimate time with the Shipibo on your own. I did that. And it really, really, really helped me on a deeper, deeper, deeper level, get in with the community and really understand the depth of what you're saying right now. And upon returning in 2018, like here fully, I see the natives now, and I look around like, oh my God, like I see what happened now, like on a deeper depth, and I just didn't understand prior, but after spending real intimate time with the indigenous in South America, coming out here and seeing what happened, it's a shame, and I'm so grateful that you've taken such action with such depth and understanding and awareness that these traditions are so important to actually uphold, because they really, really are.
Well, like I said, the next generation will understand it way better than I do now. And that's what science does. That's the beauty of it. In fact, I think that science is a better word than tradition.
Yeah.
Because tradition implies that things stay the same. But science inherent in it knows that it will always improve. Mm-hmm. And I've watched my teacher's tradition, my teacher now, Don Enrique Lopez, in the last 12 years, his tradition has changed so much. And, since we started dieting Noyarao, like, man, we're like in a whole nother world now,
Like Lasha asked Don Enrique to make her a pipe, and he ended up making her two. And somewhere along the lines, one of them was for me.
Oh, good.
And I've used it in ceremony, and this plant, like I connect with this plant, Nuyarao. Like I've talked about this plant to people, and people I've seen it when I went to go visit, when I went to the Aconcagua camp, and I seen the tree, and I've talked to people in North America about this plant where they're looking at me, telling me I'm wrong and that it's a myth, and I'm like, holy shit, I've seen a myth. Like I've actually been a part of a legend that like some people don't believe is real. Like this is, and like I literally can chant Nuyarao into my heart, and like it just the depth of like the minimal that I've experienced with this plant, it just transmutes anything that seems to be off in the environment. It's such a beautiful plant, and the expansiveness of all these plants, and I really believe that we're in a way giving these plants bodies. We're giving these plants form so they can interact through us.
Hey man, here's an idea that I've wanted to do, but maybe you're the person to do it. I've wanted to create a children's book series. There used to be a children's book series that I liked back when I was a kid, and it was like Mr. Happy, Mr. Nosy. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
They were like these little books. They were simple, like stories.
Yes.
I want to do that, but with plants.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a really good one. That's a sign right there. You told me. I'm writing this down now. I'm just gonna. If there's any lesson I learned through this conversation, it's about this idea of faith, and people just throw things at you, and if you roll with them, you kind of see what unfolds. That's so powerful. This concept of faith, this whole year.
Well, what if we could find a way to instill in children so that by the time they were like 12 years old, by the time they went to high school, they already knew that every plant has a spirit?
That's amazing. That's amazing. It would enhance the process for like man, like I had to go through such a destructive process to come to understand that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be. That was a result of the conditioning that was given to me upon meeting these plants. And you're right. You're right. It's such a beautiful idea. It really is. The Adventures of Nuyarao and Chinooksananga.
Right, man. All of them. But I was thinking actually, well, I mean, I might still do it. Maybe we should collaborate on it.
That'd be
I mean,
cool.
maybe we just need someone else like to motivate. My first idea is to do dandelion. So
Ooh,
yes, like the Amazonian plants, but I kind of want to have it be
basic,
like,
simple
well, you
ones that are
read
right in
it.
front of their face.
Yeah, exactly. You
Yeah,
read it and you're like, oh, dude, I got one of those right. Like you're sitting with a dandelion the next minute, after you get the
cool.
story.
That's cool. I got my
And
son. He said
dandelion is an incredible plant.
it's amazing. Actually, chicory root and dandelion I mixed together. It's like a substitute for coffee for me,
Oh yeah, nice.
but it provides. That's really cool that you say that. I understand what you're saying because especially with the kids, and I love how you're thinking next generation. It totally takes. I mean, it takes the ego out of the equation too. Like the initial identity of like I'm going to be the one to shift all this or this and that, and I love how you're setting this up for the kids for the next generation, and like that makes sense. That really makes absolute sense.
Well, I agree. Um, Here's something super duper cool though.
Please.
So Simon Ruffle, and I should shout out to Wai Feng Sang. He's the third doctor from the NHS that's doing the research. He came later and he did a retreat also. The three of them are the research team. So big shout out to them. But Simon has dieted Neurau, and so like the lead researcher doing the scientific medical research on ayahuasca, they're dieting Neurau, and I'm pretty sure that wasn't done, hasn't been done, and so, talking about like spirit and science coming together, it really is like coming together in a really special way. And so they're on the path now, they have a path. They know that this is the path. The Neurau is like clearing the aisles and bringing the grants and getting the approvals. And so it's so cool. It's so cool to see.
That's really incredible.
They're
Wow.
all going to end up doing the initiation course.
I love it.
I guarantee it. They're all going to do the initiation course, and they're going to set up like the most incredible psychedelic therapy center for treatment, a treatment center,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's all going to be legal.
Yeah. I see that. This it's already it's in motion. Like psilocybin's legal in parts of the states now too, right?
Yes, I believe. Well, I think Canada just voted, right? Psilocybin therapy was just legalized in Canada.
I don't know. Wow.
I think it was just a few days ago.
Oh my God. I'll look into that. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. That really is.
But
This is
yeah, Oregon's looking to legalize psilocybin on a state level. I think Vermont is also looking to legalize it on a state level. And it's been decriminalized in a few cities.
cool.
But that movement, I mean, once it gets going.
Have you seen Mike Tyson's journeys recently?
Yes, I have. Amazingly, like a student that did our 8-week course, Uni, he's an incredible tattoo artist and
Yes.
painter. He got to meet Mike Tyson to gift him a painting, and
Yes.
with Mike Tyson and the Combo frog.
Oh.
And I'm sorry, not the Combo, the Bufo frog.
Bufo. No, the 5-MEO. Oh my
the
God.
Bufo. And so yeah, he kind of turned me back on to Mike Tyson, who I was a huge fan, back in high school.
Of course.
When he was like a super badass. And man, I'm excited. Man. He's got me excited to watch a boxing match again, which is saying a lot.
Yes, me too. He's the ultimate. If you take the identity of the modern day masculine, like how far can you go with it? You can't really go further than Mike Tyson has. Like you just can't. He's the ultimate tough guy. And for me, once I seen him have this experience and have similar realizations that I have had, like, it was just so nice. It was just a weight off my shoulder, like, because like, you know, the divine masculine, we have gone pretty far to that degree, and there's a lot of people out there trying to bridge this idea of emotion, and it's okay to be in yourself and all that. And Mike Tyson you can't get any tougher than Mike Tyson, and for him to say this stuff that he's saying and have the profound realizations and be so vulnerable within himself and so confident within that vulnerability, it's just absolutely confirming.
I mean, what an incredible thought leader. You know, like he's a hero, and I'm so thankful for him. You know, like he's touching people that are not getting a chance to hear that anywhere else, you know. And like what a gift it is that the world has him.
I watched I don't know if you ever watch his Hot Boxing with Tyson podcast.
I've seen a tiny bit of it. I haven't watched the whole episode.
When he's describing the experience to LL Cool J.
Oh yeah.
The way LL Cool J's face just drops. Just that one moment. I forget what Tyson said, but it just sunk him like a ghost. I'm like, oh my God, like I don't know if I could do that. And maybe he did it since, who knows? I mean, you can't, like I watched Mike Tyson telling, I forget who it was. It's one of the interviews, but he's like, come on, you know me. Do I talk like this? Have I ever talked like this?
Right.
You know it. And they're trying to bridge that to whoever it was. And it's just profound. I love this guy's journey.
The potential for the psychedelic therapy, man. I mean, just psychedelics in general, like if it becomes okay to take psychedelics with no stigma, you know, mm-hmm. Man, I'm not worried about the world at all.
No,
you know, like people will get in touch with their emotions and be able to express them, or at least try to, and figure out that path. And I don't know, I just see it being like the key to getting us back to being the natural human beings that we are.
Yeah.
And acting like out of instinct. Yeah. You know, like instinct, it's something that we even forgot that we have, but we recognize it in animals. But we do have instinct, and that is the connection to nature. And to me, like psychedelics, through their ability to increase awareness, like it's inevitable that we return to understanding that we are connected to nature and returning to our instincts, and those instincts will never lead us astray.
No, and you don't lose anything. And that's I've talked to a lot of people about medicine. They're afraid to, they say I couldn't do that because, what if I realize I don't want this, or I don't want that, or I don't want this? And the biggest thing I tell them in that regard is like I personally don't eat McDonald's. I just don't. I'm not saying McDonald's is a bad thing. I mean, well, it's pretty unhealthy for you, but whatever. Let's step off and get her bad. In an unconditional loving point of view, I just don't eat McDonald's, but I used to. I used to eat it a lot. But it doesn't mean that McDonald's isn't an option. Like, it's still a block away. It's still down the road. I can still go there. I'm just choosing not to because now I see many more options. And with psychedelic therapy comes in, like you said at the beginning, like people only see two colors, but there's a vast array of colors that most of us just aren't aware of. And we're not even aware that's even an option to be aware of something more, to have the experience and to see that there is more out there is just so profound.
That's well put, man. We're not even aware that you can be more aware.
I went, with ayahuasca, the bridge for me, I had a friend in 2012. Now, I hadn't seen him in a while. I ran into him at a wedding, and we were drunk. We were outside the after party or whatever, having a cigarette. And he starts opening up, and we're having one of those like drunken bro talks of like life. And he just starts opening up about depression, how he's been having these suicidal thoughts, and just a whole hellish experience he's having in this moment. And he decides to open up to me, and I'm giving him that pep talk as much as I can with what I know back in 2012. And then fast forward a year later, this guy, I found out he's in the Amazon, in the words where he's doing some drug with some tribes. And I thought he was gone. Like I thought he was off his rocker. He's lost. That's it, you know. And he comes back to Canada, and I got on the phone with him right away, like concerned. I'm like, what the hell are you doing with your life, man? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, and he starts telling me that his depression's gone, and he's happier, and he sees life with more clarity. And he used words like spiritual awakening, which were totally Greek to me at the time. And he said what he did in the jungle, it wasn't a drug. It was, in fact, a medicine that they've been using for thousands of years in the indigenous communities down there, and it was called ayahuasca. And a lot of the stuff he said, you know, it didn't fully land what he was explaining, but what did land was that there was a noticeable shift over a phone call. Something different had happened for this guy. And I was so curious, so absolutely curious. It ended up taking me down to Peru myself to go have the experience. But without that, I don't know if I would have been able to even be aware of this thing, or, you know, anything. Like it was a very, very profound experience, but it definitely opened doors for more options. And my life has personally been absolutely magical since I first drank ayahuasca. And as a result of just seeing more options are actually just available there.
Yeah, man. I don't know if I'd still be here if I hadn't found it, you know?
Are you afraid of death?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess my only fear would be how others react.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
You know, I have a 5-year-old daughter. I have a wife. I have family.
That was the hardest thing. It was so easy to, you know, like I went very transient, you know, like going to the jungle, facilitating, and just traveling the world in the meantime and doing whatever. And it was easy to dive into these concepts of just letting go and take leaps of faith. And relearning that with a family was
Right.
wow. At first there was like this almost this shame of like, I already know this stuff. Why is it so hard? But having a family, it really takes it to a whole new level. I believe it's the same lessons, reapplication, but from like ground zero almost.
Totally, man.
You can relate to that?
Oh, without a doubt, man.
Okay.
It was almost like I turned away from all the lessons, you know. like I was like, oh, I'm totally on the path. I've got all this faith, and now I'm like so worried that I'm not going to be able to take care of my kids.
And that I was so ashamed of myself for that until I accepted that I'm just not perfect. Things started to get perfect again.
Dude, yeah, I remember too, and I was like, why is it that like I'm so worried that they're not going to be taken care of, but like I'm so faithful that I will be taken care of? Like, really? Like, how is that possible that you can't like put those two together?
Yeah, like yet it's I believe it's the expansion of faith for us. I really do. We're expanding our ability to have faith, because to have it with a family and still discover magical results within that space is it's mystifying. It's beyond words. And I'm a word guy. I got thousands of poems, and it's just I'll never get there with my poetry, and that's why I love poetry, and that's why I'll continue to write poetry.
Something super cool happened this year. It was called the pandemic.
Yeah.
At first, you know, I was all riled up. Everybody was, I guess, but it kind of like made things real again. It was like getting lost.
Yeah.
You know, I needed like a new path or something. And And the finding of that path gave this new motivation, this new this deepening of faith, this like new root stock into my faith, because I had problems to solve. I've got a business that's based in a country that the borders are still closed and have been for 5 months. And in the solving of those problems, like, these brilliant opportunities appeared. And now it's like I see the golden road again, but
Yes.
it's going in a different direction, and I'm just loving it. Like, I think, well, whatever. I'm just so satisfied, I feel so blessed that this year went down the way that it did. And I was joking with my wife the other day, which wasn't a joke. We were just laughing at how silly it might sound to someone else to hear us say it. But we're going to look back at this year and be like, this was a great year.
So awesome. You're so right. Like when I think about the adventure that this year has been, like when it first started, I jumped on social media and I started doing videos telling everybody don't be afraid. Every day I'm doing this, and that became my purpose, my mission. I'm doing this and doing this and doing this until I realized the only reason I'm doing this is because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what will happen if everybody's afraid. So the energy that I'm sharing is just fear, 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 fear. And that was a great inside out experience for me. And then the news. Oh my God, like getting caught up in the fear of the news, just that once again, it took me so far outward that I had no choice but to go inward and find myself again. You're right. When I reflect, I enjoy this journey, especially 2020. Like, this has been a fun and hilarious random ride.
Yeah, I mean, whether or not it's hilarious, I'm not sure,
I
but
mean,
I definitely feel like it will go down for me as a great year, because I'm making changes that I'm so glad to be making. Even when, like, we're going to start up our programs again. They just announced today Peru's going to open their borders on October 1st. And so, right away, like, I've been getting everybody ready to go for next month. But last month, I decided that we're going to do things differently. And I like started drawing up the plans for new programs. And it was so awesome to be doing that again, and to like rethink how we can achieve the best outcomes with our programs, and just to like get back in there again. And there's no way I would have been doing that. Like, I just can't see that I would have been doing that if I didn't have this lengthy break,
yeah,
if I didn't have all this time off.
yeah,
And then with my family, we had a plan, and I thought the plan was great. And it was it involved like where we were going to live, and where my daughter was going to go to school, because she's going to start kindergarten. And those are like, that's my world right now, is having my daughter like start school. And everything, I had no choice but to change the plan. Like a giant tree fell in the forest, and the rest of the plants had to react to it, and that adaptation, though, and the ability to like seek out light that wasn't penetrating the forest floor before, like there was like this whole new shift. And it involved adaptation, but in the adaptation I saw like the potential for a whole new level of thriving that I didn't know existed. I wasn't aware. And so my daughter's education is going to be totally different now too. and
really.
and I'm so happy about it. Like, both me and my wife are so happy that we found these new pathways that we didn't know were even there. And it was because we had to look somewhere else, you know? And I think that the tree falling or the forest fire or the hurricane or the flood or whatever, if you watch nature, it will always adapt. You know, all the plants and all the animals, whatever fucking shit hits them, they always adapt and they always learn to thrive. And that's what gives birth to diversity. And that's what made the planet so incredible. The planet wasn't incredible because everything went according to plan. The planet is incredible because nothing went according to plan.
Ever.
You know, everything got fucked up, and every time it did, all these new solutions came about. And so it like took something that shook people to the core of their fears to get me, at least, to see how much more opportunity there was or there is. And so it's not even a question. I'm going to look back at 2020 and be like, yeah, that was one of the best years.
That's so cool. It's to be able to adapt in such a way. I mean, and you keep reiterating it, you were kind of forced to adapt in that regard. And it's just having the realization of what's been transferring like along the way. That's so profound. And just to reiterate, the only thing hilarious about this was my own fears of my own mental process, not the pandemic itself. Not hilarious at all. Just because I'm putting this out there in case someone's watching.
Yeah, for sure.
My own personal inside out mental process of what I went through to come to the same realizations I had prior, but on a deeper level.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to say that I just rode this out like a champ, you know, but there were times when my wife and I were freaking out. And, you know, we agreed that we were going to like shelter our daughter from it as much as possible because we, you know, we didn't want her to feel any negative emotions or have any detriment to her health as a result of it. But she would go to bed, my daughter, and there were definitely times where I think I probably had a few panic attacks, like full blown, like hardcore panic attacks that my wife like helped me through, you know. So it wasn't without its I guess that's why I was like hilarious. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
But I totally, you know, that's where, how many times have you had a freaking panic attack in a ceremony or whatever you want to call it, you know?
My God.
But at the end of it, there's the realization at the end of it, you know, or through it, you know, and sometimes you wouldn't make a change if you don't have to. Actually, that's like Bruce Lipton in Spontaneous Evolution, who I also am a huge fan of Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief, but in Spontaneous Evolution, he said something that was very, very poignant for me, which was that evolution doesn't happen gradually. There's no reason to change if everything's fine. And what creates the motivation for change is crisis. And so evolution will only occur in leaps that are brought on by crisis. And it makes so much sense, you know? And the cool part is that you can look at crises in a totally different way. You know, now crisis is the motivator for evolution. Well, man, that's a pretty positive
And now imagine if we're all able to see it like that. Initially, upon recognition of the crisis now, we know there's going to be some transformations. We know that we're going to create a new, and you know, you can be excited about transition without being flippant about the seriousness of meeting something. And I think that's where a lot of people are misconstruing the whole idea of this stuff. It's the mindset. You know, you don't have to be absolutely terrified all the time to be taking this seriously.
No, definitely, because man, it's the greatest medicine at our disposal every second is our ability to laugh and smile.
Yeah.
But my first trip to Peru was in 2000, and I went by myself. I took a bus from Lima to Cusco to like take the
Up the
cheap way.
mountain.
Yeah, the cheap way to get to Cusco. And we crashed head on into a Mack truck in high up in the Andes.
20 years ago. Wow.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
Wow.
And I was all by myself. I didn't speak Spanish. My stuff was on the roof of the bus, and now I'm like in a t-shirt and shorts high up in the Andes with snow on the ground, standing next to our smashed up bus, wondering what the hell I'm doing, you know? And I was, in my weird twisted mind, I was nervous that I might get my documents stolen or lost. So I left my passport and my identification with this Peruvian family that I had been staying with in Lima. So I did. I was like, I have no ID. Like, I don't have any identification.
That's awesome.
And it, you know, what if I just disappeared today? You know,
Yeah.
I would literally just have disappeared. But I ended up, someone saw me shivering and gave me their sweatshirt. It was a guy from Holland. He was traveling by himself, and he was taking the cheap route to go to Cusco, to go to Machu Picchu, just like me. And then this Frenchman came over, and then this Scottish came over. All four of us traveling by ourselves, happened to be on that same bus, taking the cheap route to Cusco so that we could go to Machu Picchu. And we all decided, let's just do this together. So
Wow.
4 hours later, they managed to fix the bus, and we like one headlight like went down this crazy road into Cusco. We shared a hotel room. We shared all our expenses, and we became the best of friends. We did the Inca Trail together. At the end, I realized I never could have done it financially. I didn't have the money to do the trip unless I shared the expenses, which we did as a result of the bus crash. And so forever I looked back and was like, thank God the bus drove head on into a Mack truck. That was like such a blessing for me to have that happen. And so now when something shitty seems to be happening, I just use that as this model. Like, dude, I'm going to look back and say, I'm so glad that this happened.
Yeah.
But I just don't know why yet. And so I don't care why. I just know that this isn't a shitty thing happening right now, because it's going to be the thing that I say is the greatest thing that happened, you know? And it's such a great way to help me through like a difficult time.
Yeah.
But everybody has the bus crash. I mean, not a bus crash, but everybody has the story of something they thought was really shitty and then turned out to be really great, whether it was like a horrible breakup or a divorce or something or whatever, and then you meet the love of your life later, or you lose your job and you don't know what you're going to do, and then you find out finding a whole different career path that's much more satisfying, whatever. Every single one of us has a story where we thought something was shitty, only to then look back and say it was one of the greatest things that we have happen. So now when something shitty happens, why are we thinking it's shitty? We know from past experience, it's been proven to us in our own personal experiences in our lives that it's not shitty. It's
That's
actually
cool.
going to be what we're thinking is the greatest thing to happen.
You know, that's powerful. And it also reminds me, like when we are calm and neutral, we're a lot more impeccable with our decision making than when we're frantic and terrified. Like it's just a fact. Like this is how we operate. And if we look at this consistently, like it's shitty, like it's terrifying, like it's, well, we're going to freeze up over and over and over and over again. But if we can meet it, like, wow, this is an exciting time. This is just perceptually. If we can literally flip that switch and see it as an exciting transition, we can see that we actually can be a part of this transition and actually take the reins and start creating what we want through this together. Have you ever heard the story of I think it's Honda guy? I think it's Tony Robbins. I think he was talking about it in his book. Have you ever heard of this story?
Is it good luck, bad luck?
I'm not sure. It was when the guy that made the Honda motors back in Japan,
Oh,
way back in the day, he got his factory bombed by the Americans a couple times. But every time he would take the metal from the bombs and he would call them gifts from God. And he started using this specific metal to rebuild his motors. And because of that, that's what turned Honda into what it is today.
I didn't know that story.
It's a great one that I consistently draw upon. Definitely. You
I
know
thought you
what?
were like naming a like a Buddhist author or something. Honda.
Oh. some inventor, some entrepreneur. But we all have that story.
Totally we do. It's a fact. It's a proven fact for us. And that again is more, it kind of comes back again to the faith, like our path. It's in our minds. My path changed because this happened.
Yeah.
But well, sure, just keep calling it a path. I mean, it totally fits. It's a great word.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it's more helpful to know that like it's us that are changing.
Yeah.
And that goes all the way back to the very first thing that we talked about, which is our superpower, which is our ability to determine how we choose to react to our experiences.
And that comes back
And
down to
how we choose to react to our experiences is what creates the reality that we live in.
so simple and so complex all at the same time.
Well, one of the biggest things too that I've noticed, especially from talking to my friends, and I'm sure you've experienced it with some of your friends too, because not everybody views what's happened with the pandemic and all the details the same way. Haha. Not um, most of reality is imagined. My reality, what I think of as like my true reality, is that I'm living in my dad's house. My dad's watching TV right now. I can hear that. And I interact with him and my daughter and my wife. Well, my daughter's asleep right now, and my wife's probably looking at news about the border reopening in Peru so she can maybe go back and see her mom. And because my wife is Peruvian. And that's my real true reality,
Wow, no
and
doubt.
because that's the reality of my experience. And like I went shopping today with my daughter. We went to a supermarket. That was a real supermarket. We bought real food. I spoke with the cashier, and that was real. And that's all experience. That's true reality. But the mass majority of what I think is happening in the world, what I think is happening in other cities, what I'm reading about, what other people are saying, all of that, I'm not experiencing it. But yet I am imagining it to be reality. But it's just my imagination. And I think that if we spend more time living in our true reality, which is our experience, and less time in our imaginary reality, which we don't experience, then we'll realize that life isn't so complicated and life is really good.
That's amazing that you say that. A couple of years ago, I was with a friend in a restaurant or something in California, and I'm always doing small talk with people, right? And the guy that was serving, I think it was one of those like you pay at the till and then they bring your food out to you. So I'm just asking him how his week's been, just back and forth a little bit. And then my friend goes on to tell me that there was a study. He goes, what you just did, he goes, they've done studies that people who engage in small talk like that actually live longer. And you were talking about, you just even bringing up that you spoke to a cashier today. You're right. Like you're being absolutely present with your reality. And the way you put it, that's actually really profound because we are watching the news. We're exploring what's happening in all these other people's realities and what's going on out there and what out there. We're actually bypassing the essence of the beauty that is us. Just the other day, I went down to the water and there was this lady there. And she was in her 60s. And she was just in awe of this pigeon. There was this pigeon just sitting over there. She was just in awe of it. Then she goes on to tell me how she's seen humpback whales yesterday, and she's pointing out so much beauty within the depth of the moment, like that she's just reawakening me to the moment with every word that she's saying, you know. And we're in small talk, and I'm telling her about some of my travels, and she's like, "Oh my God, like you're living so amazing." She's like, "I don't get to do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I got to travel the world to have realizations that you've been having in this one spot your whole life. This is incredible. Like, you are absolutely inspiring. Thank you for reminding me how beautiful wherever I am actually is." And you're so right. Thank you for saying that too, because that actually, like, that reminds me to even look at my wall and just look around and embrace it, because that's the whole point of this gift of life, is to actually embrace it. And most of us, we've steered away from the embracement of what is, and that's where we become disconnected, and that's where it becomes a practice again. And the more I practice remembering and embodying the beauty of the moment, the more I'm naturally experiencing life's beauty, the more connected to God I am, in essence. You know, that's an open-ended term, God, but either or, like, the more I'm connected to the universe, to the planets, to life, to the essence of life force, and everything opens up, and that's really cool. And for you to say that, you also have the track record. So for anybody that's even listening to this, if they're wondering what to do in their life and they're so confused, all they really got to do is be present, because the result of presence has enabled you to create these magical experiences, which has bridged so much for consciousness.
Well, I appreciate those kind words also. I had the extreme privilege of having two grandparents that were still alive, like for a long time. My grandmother died when she was 98, and she was just an incredible person. And I remember being like in my early 20s, and I was worried about the world, you know, and I was over at her house, and I said, "I don't know, Grandma, you know, I'm worried about the world." And she was like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "There's a lot of bad people out there, and I'm worried they're doing bad things." And she said, "I don't know a single bad person."
Ooh.
And I was like, "Fuck." You know, like I don't either. Like I don't either. You know, I'm just imagining it. And that was huge for me. That was really, really important. She was an incredibly wise person.
It's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, you know, one of my favorite things is speaking to older people and asking them their perspective of life. And this one time I was walking through Fairfax, California, and there was this guy was in his 70s, and I walked up and asked him. I said, "Excuse me, like, just curious, like, you got like 40 more years on me. If there was one thing that you wish you knew at my age that you could share with me now, so I can learn the lesson now, what would it be?"
Wow.
And he said, "Look around and appreciate it. You have no clue how fast this thing goes."
Yeah, man.
I had a ceremony once where, you ever had convulsions in a ceremony where you just like myoclonic shaking, where you just like a lot of energy is coming through your body and you just can't stop vibrating?
Yes, sir.
I was on my stomach, and I smacked my jaw on the ground while I was doing that. And instantly, in my mind, I had broken my jaw, and there's no talking me out of that. And I'm sitting outside in Maloka, smoking a mapacho in my own like torment. And the shaman had an assistant with him. And the guy comes outside and he sits beside me, and he's just talking about the beauty of the plants. And I'm festering in this idea that I broke my jaw. We got a group coming in like 5 days. What am I going to tell these guys? Day one, I got my jaw wired shut. I'm going to be like, "Oh, by the way, guys, I broke my jaw drinking ayahuasca. Here's some medicine." I'm just lost in that. And he looks at me and goes, "Are you in pain right now, brother?" And I'm like, "No." He goes, "Why worry about it?" I had nothing. I'm like, "Yeah, Right. And my jaw wasn't broken. That was
Right.
all me. I was fine. But I'm not in pain right now. Why am I worried about something that isn't even happening to me right now?
Yep. Yeah, I would say, I've been trying to stay off of social media.
Mhm.
Um, but of course I do check in, and it does seem like a lot of people are afraid about the unknown future. And, they're worried about what's going to happen. And, there's, when could you never worry about the unknown?
Like we've always been that's the hilarity of it. We've
Yeah,
always been afraid of the future. We've always been afraid of the unknown. And yeah,
but we could equally be excited.
yeah, yeah. Actually, they say anxiety and excitement are the exact same actual sensation. And perspective comes from an old Latin word, which translates to the science of optics. And being a poet, I look at it as the art of how I see things. And an art, any art practice, you just get better at it and better at it and better at it. And I know that you would have had the same experience. I have personally, and I'm reminding myself again and again and again, because we do fall off the journey, is I have correlated that the way I choose to see the world actually determines how I experience it in real time. And my perspective is always in my control. The only reason I believe any of us would feel anxiety or fear or lost in it is just because we're not aware that our own perspective is in our control. And we'll either even blaming the media is a silly thing to do, because I'm choosing to give it energy. I'm choosing to give it power if I'm going to do that, and that's like, it's really funny to I always come full circle, and it's always just like a cosmic joke of like, why did I do that to myself? Why did I make myself so worried? Why did I make myself so angst? I can't not laugh at the hilarity of what I've done to myself to have the same realization again.
Yeah. Well, I would say that one of the things I always have to catch myself, and I'm sure that you can relate, I've been working with ayahuasca for 17 years, and I've come to these realizations through this epic journey that I've been so blessed to get to partake in, and sum up the lesson now.
Yeah.
I like, the last thing I want to do is like simplify, like, oh, you just got to change the way you think, like, like, yes, but but it took me a real long time to get to that lesson, and I still am not even close to claiming that I've have some mastery of it. But
Yeah.
but at least the awareness of it, like that to me is still what was so important, and it was like what you said that I thought was great was, you're not even aware that you could be more aware. And that's something that ayahuasca probably did more for me than anything, was just to like show me that there's so much more, and it's kind of funny because there's the classic statement, seeing is believing. And when you see in ayahuasca ceremonies, sometimes you don't believe, but what you do realize is that shit, the stuff that I thought I was seeing is not good enough anymore for me to rely on to determine my truth. And once you do that, then I think you like liberate yourself from the concept that truth is objective. And that's when you empower yourself to what you're talking about, like you empower yourself to control your perspective. Not that you achieve it, but you empower yourself to control it. Like it becomes an endeavor worth taking on. And and that's like why I feel like I want to try to teach that to my daughter, and why I think it should be one of the most important things that we teach our children is understanding the connection of reality and our reaction to experience.
Makes absolute sense. Makes absolute sense. Man, wow. Yeah, you've I love the vulnerability you share with. Mainly because we're at a time where not many people get the village experience living with a shaman with his t-shirt on in a specific space. We're at a time where this stuff is pedestalized. These practices are pedestalized, and there's a lot of bypassing happening within that space. To see somebody that's done some phenomenal things for the ayahuasca movement, 17 years deep into this practice, still getting into anxiety, still falling on, still openly sharing that I don't know much. Like, that is the teaching. At least in my viewpoint, that in and of itself is the teaching. Because like hearing you so humble within it, it validates my drive to keep that within myself.
Well, all right. I mean, your son, how old is he now?
Almost 2. He's 20 months.
Yeah, so he's getting close to like breaking your mind wide open. I mean, I'm sure he has already.
Oh my God.
But there's gonna, pretty soon you're gonna have a point where you're just gonna be able to start talking to him, like in a way where he's gonna talk back and ask you questions and stuff, and that's when it gets.
I'm pumped because like
awesome.
You being a philosopher, I love like philosophical viewpoints. Like I'm really pumped to have these in-depth conversations, and he's gonna ask me questions that I wouldn't have even thought to ask, and I'm gonna be so pumped that I heard that question. Like, yeah, I'm excited for that. He's already looking at. I got a Buddha statue in the living room, and he'll stop and he'll look at this thing, put his hands together, and om.
Nice. Yeah, my daughter is such an incredible teacher for me. And, everything that I've been saying about the power of nature and reconnecting, kids don't reconnect to nature.
Connected. You know what he did the other day? I woke up and I was feeling off, right? And Lasha was kind of feeling off, and we're sitting there, and then all of a sudden, Teddy looks at us both and he goes, and he just keeps doing this, and then we start following him, and then now we're getting back into our breath, and we're getting back into, we're just like, thank you.
For real.
I love that you see your daughter as your teacher, because like if you can look at it like that, you gain so much through your child. Not to put pressure on your kid or anything. Just wow. There's so much to learn.
You brought up that point about the woman who was like 60 who was so enamored by the pigeon.
Oh,
that's every 5-year-old.
Yeah.
That's every 3-year-old. That's every child who recognizes magic when they see it, who recognizes mysterious wonder when they are experiencing it, who is a state of awe, because it is awe-inspiring to be alive. And those are lessons that I'm blessed to get to learn every day, that I get to spend with my daughter. But they're so important.
Yeah.
And then the beauty part for me is like, my wife and I have made a decision that we're not going to like play any games or, like, like hide the truth from her, so if she wants to know something, we're just going to tell her, and as honestly as possible. But obviously that takes creativity. Sometimes something like earlier today, we were talking about the presidential election. She was asking about who's running for president, and and who they are, what we think about them. It was kind of interesting, like, to hear her. Like, so what do you think of Joe? She said to her mom. It's just like calling him by his first name. and to be able to communicate something in a way that a 5-year-old can understand, it actually is like really beautiful. Like, we should all kind of take that model. One of my favorite authors is Thich Nhat Hanh. He's written like 50 books. He's a Buddhist from Vietnam, and one of his most famous books is Touching Peace. And when you read his books, it looks like they're written for like a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Which is brilliant, because you just have to kind of simplify and condense everything down to what's important to get your point across, and all the rest of the stuff actually isn't helpful. Like,
yeah, I understand completely. Like, this one job
like
I
if you
had,
can't explain something to a 5-year-old,
yeah,
then I don't think that you really understand it yourself.
it's amazing. Just today I've been doing I'm really passionate about bridging communication, like I was saying, and Lasha, I've been going on Instagram Live, and Lasha will ask me a question about communication, and I want, like, I love it how she put me on the spot live, and so I have to just throw an answer. And the question was, today it was, what do you do when you're in a conversation and you're trying to give somebody a message and it's not being received? How do you meet that moment? And I love what you said, because you can speak to a 5-year-old like anything. Knowing who you're speaking to is so valuable. Being in sync with who you're actually talking to, because you can say the same message to 10 different people. And if you're really passionate about having that message land, you might have to say it 10 different ways. It just is what it is. And a lot of people I notice get misconstrued. It's that person's fault. They didn't hear me. They're not listening. They're not this and that. And what they're doing is giving away their power. Because, like, when I'm able to take a step back and really assess how I'm delivering that message, I can find different ways to enable that message to land if I really want it to land. And that's really cool that you're bringing that up, because that's the same philosophy of, like, I'm speaking to my 5-year-old and she's enabling me to simplify this complex topic that I wouldn't have talked to a 5-year-old about, but doing so, it probably, like, it's benefiting me in so many ways.
Yeah, to be as crazy as it sounds, I feel like after that conversation, I know who I'm voting for.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
I love it. I love it. That's really cool. That's
It's
really
not who
cool.
I thought I was going to be voting for until we had that conversation. How's that?
I love it. That is so awesome. That is
For
so
real.
awesome.
Yeah. I'm not
Oh,
going to
man.
tell you who that is, though.
No, I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to
I don't
ask.
want your comments to blow up.
It's going to be the one. Someone's going to extract that. Ayahuasca owner votes for.
Yeah.
What's it called? Clickbait?
Yeah. So speaking of like that ayahuasca, the headlines that you would see with scientific research that used to bother me all the time was ayahuasca does this. Study finds ayahuasca does this. And I've never been a big fan of that language, because it's so like westernized. It's such a Western paradigm of understanding. And that might be true the way that pharmaceutical drugs are researched, because there's no tradition surrounding in their use, although I wish there was. And so one really cool thing about the research that's starting to get published that we did, or that our center hosted, that was done by Simon and Nigel and Wai Feng, is that they use the term in its natural setting. And that to me also was like really key, that it's being done in its natural setting, meaning it's being done in ceremonies in the Amazon rainforest led by authentic indigenous curanderos.
Ooh.
And there's not very much research that has been done in that way. And I hope that we can like start to break through to a better understanding that how we take medicine is perhaps more important than what we take as medicine.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's really powerful. That's really powerful. I'm very grateful to have experienced in the setting that I have, like especially as a foundational point for me, because I was able to grasp that right away, and I'm really grateful I have. Like I'm super grateful. Like I say this at risk of like sounding like I'm tooting my own horn, and I'm absolutely not. I just remember the reverence, the consistent reverence that it was just so important to me to honor the tradition, to honor the Shipibos, to really learn and ask questions, and like the knowledge that they have is so profound. I remember we traveled with these shamans upriver, 5 hour boat ride upriver. I forget what some village, and then we took a boat ride 5 a.m. to their pueblo, and we did ceremony in their house. And the one shaman, I got to meet her mom, and her mom didn't even speak Spanish. She was like she didn't even know her own age. She was just as Shipibo as it gets, and it was just so cool to be asking her questions. I was asking. Oh, I had a friend there she was Spanish, so I was asking her questions in English, getting it translated in Spanish, and then getting that Spanish translated in Shipibo, and then she was answering the questions and translating it back. And you don't get that anymore. And what you're preserving is humanity. It's phenomenal what you're preserving, because like I said, looking back at North America and see what happened, and there's a lot of healing to be done. It's like you just made a big interception right now, or the plants, grabbed you and just said, "Wow, Carlos, thank you for joining us on this journey." It's wow, And I love how anytime anybody's like, "You just did this, Carlos," you just kind of not once you're like, "Yes, I did this." Always diverting it, and that's mastery. It really is.
Yeah, I gotta say, you've like been blowing some smoke up my ass this whole interview, and I appreciate it. And I have I guess trouble like accepting it, because I just know like how many thousands of beings were involved in it, and I kind of see myself like as the face of it more than the actual people doing it.
Thanks for receiving the compliments. Through the medicine, I've learned that how I see the world is a reflection of how I see myself. And when you're able to receive such depth of the way I'm seeing it, it enables me to expand beyond belief as well. It's very mutual. And I did a video a couple years ago about like, when you talk bad about people, you're really talking bad about something within yourself. And when we're able to see the profound beauty that another human being is actually accomplishing and achieving on Earth, we're able to see who we are. We're able to see ourselves within that space. And by allowing yourself to receive these compliments, you're really doing a profound healing thing for me. It's benefiting me greatly.
Cool, man. I'm glad to hear that.
Oh man. Wow, we've been going for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's true.
That's so amazing, man. Let's wind her up. Is there any last words? Like anybody watching this, like, is there anything you really just have always wanted to express about the medicine, about life, like what, like that you're passionate about bridging?
Well, man, we've had such a great, I love chatting with you. We bring
Likewise.
out each other's ideas, and it's like we have such a good resonance. I think that this stuff comes to the surface much easier with each other.
Yeah.
So I feel psyched that I got to say a bunch of the ideas that I've had that I hope will be helpful for people to hear. One of the things that I think has been really helpful for me. And you talked about it, about reverence and how the tradition, or more specifically, the ceremony of ayahuasca, it changes you, and if you take a pharmaceutical medication in the Western world, there's very little respect. There's very little consciousness. There's very, it's like
Just popping the
devoid.
pill. Yeah.
Yeah, it's devoid of connection, and it's devoid of any sense of consciousness enhancement or connection. But the ceremony is totally different, and so much of the power comes from the ceremony rather than the ayahuasca itself. And to me, though, what the ceremony really does is remind us that life is the ceremony, but we just have to get together sometimes and go into a maloca and drink ayahuasca to remember it, and if there is something that we could all remember, it's that our lives, every minute of it, is part of the ceremony. Highs and lows, and joy and laughter, and sadness and sorrow, and all the lessons, like, it's all part of something that deserves our reverence and our awe. And it's everything that happens inside an ayahuasca ceremony happens throughout our lives. It might not be as condensed or intense, but it's all happening. And again, like, we choose how we react to our experiences. And if we choose to view our lives as a ceremony, I think that would probably be a great guide as to how to react to our experiences. Because so many times in a ceremony, something will maybe put you in a dark place or a terrible place, and there's always this kind of background thought that, dude, a few hours, it'll be over anyway.
Yeah.
Like, you can't freak out too much. The ceremony's only going to be a few hours long, and that's a great, like, background to have for life too. Like, your dreams are as real as long as they last. When you're in your dream, it's totally real until you wake up. And that's where we're at with our lives too. And so you don't have to worry about it so much, Like, you might get caught up in your dreams worrying about something, but your goal should be just to explore the mystery of it all. We all want to be lucid, and we all want to, like, realize we can fly when we're dreaming. And that should be the same attitude that we have when we're living.
So true. So true. Wow. I could keep going for another hour, but I'm just going to end it at that. Like, honestly, I could just keep talking to you about this stuff. Oh my God. Thank you so much.
Dude, it's so great to connect with you, man.
You
It's been a
too.
pleasure.
You too. I definitely want to do this again. It'd be cool to get you back up here. This would be awesome.
Yeah, totally, man.
Oh,
hopefully
right
one
on.
day we can do, like, one where we're in the same room together.
Absolutely. It's going to happen.
Nice.
It's going to happen. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. We're out. If people want to get a hold of you, though, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh yeah, ayahuascafoundation.org. And you can look me up at Ayahuasca Foundation on Instagram, or Ayahuasca Found on Twitter, or Facebook, Ayahuasca Foundation Retreats.
Cool. That's it. Thanks a lot, guys. Love yourself unconditionally. Take a breath and enjoy the moment. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I actually didn't stop recording.